Trey Young is proving his critics wrong. It seems like no player in the NBA is scrutinized, overrated, underrated, and overhated in the same way as Trae Young. And with Young recently just being named as an all-star replacement and earning his 8th Player of the Week award, it seems right to go over his games that he played last week to see what makes Trae Young so special. This is Weekly Wednesdays, sometimes happening on a Wednesday, and this episode is about the Gerber Life baby himself, Trae Young.
Got it! A three-pointer for Trae. Hawks don't have a timeout. Trae from midcourt to win it. Lets it go. Ice cold.
Trae Young has always been a player that is hard to rank. On the one hand, he is seen as one of the most overrated players in the league and is pretty consistently voted like it. But on the other hand, if you are always voted to be overrated, are you really then overrated? Not to mention, when Trae and the Hawks were at their healthiest and at their prime, this is a team that made the Eastern Conference Finals and has played well beyond the expectations that we saw of them all the way back in 2021. Now, being hated, getting snubbed, and getting trade, as Trae Young likes to call it, is nothing new for him, whether it's the All-NBA team, the All-Star team, or even becoming a finalist for Team USA basketball. And despite all the trade talks that happened last season, and despite the most superstar active trade deadline in NBA history, Trae Young still finds himself in the same home he has since draft night. Regardless of the overrated or underrated conversations, and regardless of the trade talk surrounding Trae Young, I want to break down his play specifically from last week to see what makes him such a special player. Last week, Trae Young averaged 31 points and almost 11 assists per game on an unreal 62% true shooting percentage while hitting a game-winning shot against the Detroit Pistons. In other words, this was peak Trae Young, and if you ask just any Hawks or Knicks fan, peak Trae Young is near unguardable. But why is that? We know Trae has a deep ball, and we know he's one of the best passers in the league, but there is a little bit more complexity to his game, especially once you factor in that he is one of the smallest guards in the NBA. So let's talk about the three ball, as that is where Trae Young's game begins. Trae becomes a threat the second he crosses over half court, where we basically see him getting covered in the same way we see Steph Curry getting covered. That is, a man meeting him at the logo. Despite seeing Curry-like defense, Trae Young has never seen Curry-like shooting efficiency, with his best year being quite a few years ago where he shot 38%, but this year his shooting is all the way down to 33 to 34% from 3, which doesn't exactly scream elite 3-point shooting. So how does someone who is a below average or just average 3-point shooter garner so much attention on the perimeter? The answer is, he's not below average. Just like guys like Jason Tatum, Luka Doncic, Devin Booker, Jaylen Brown, and other star players, their three ball is much better than what their rating and what their actual efficiency suggests. Trae Young is a high volume shooter who has one of the deepest ranges we have ever seen in the NBA. If defenses didn't guard him in the logo, and if they didn't guard him in the aggressive way that we see him, it would be a recipe for disaster. Trae Young is a pretty solid 3-point shooter. We know he shot about 40% on open 3-point shots over the last 2 seasons. This year, that open 3-point mark is down to about 33-34%, not being any different from his mark on the entire year, but I think that is due to his Achilles injury that he has been dealing with for a lot of this season. Being a small guard with a lower body leg injury does make it difficult to actually become an elite shooter because your form is just a little bit different and you don't get that same amount of power that you're used to getting. So I do kind of understand why we're not seeing the same kind of Trae Young shooting that we are used to from previous seasons. But regardless of what his stats say, NBA defenses still treat him like an elite shooter, and it makes sense because we know that he can still score in a volume. Like I said, over 4 games, he averaged almost 31 points per game on a 62% true shooting percentage. That is efficient at a very high mark. And Trae can shoot and score in a variety of ways. He has a lethal floater game. He's one of the best mid-range shooters in the league, and that's not talked about enough. From 3, he can score off the dribble, off the catch, sidestep, step back, in the pick and roll. You name it, he can score in a variety of ways. He's even scoring one-legged threes this year. But outside shooting is just a single part of Trae Young's game, and you would be sorely mistaken to think if it was the best part of his game. And the first thing that I want to mention with Trae Young is not his passing, but it's his ball handling and his ability to leverage the defense. Trae Young has an insane quick first step, crossover, and hesitation, and we saw that get used plenty, especially against the Wizards and the Spurs. Like in this clip against the Wizards, all it takes is just one crossover, the defense is left in a bad position, and that is a wide open three for Young. Then here against the Spurs, he uses a similar move to get to the right, and he is too quick to stop. And this is the play that we all see that shows that Trae is a master of angles and reacting to the defense. After getting his switch onto Jeremy Sohan, Trae uses a head fake to the left before in one swift move, gets the ball into his right hand, gets lower than Sohan, and eventually he's in front of him. Later in that same game, it's the exact same move, this time against Stephon Castle, now with Trae showing off one of the best floaters in the league. And one more time, it's the exact same move. This time resulting with Trae getting to his spot at the mid-range area. And like I said, Trae is one of the best mid-range shooters in the game, with NBA.com putting him at a 45% mark from the mid-range spot this year. And Trae gets really crafty when he uses his hesitation as a counter to the crossover, such as this one that left Harrison Barnes in the dust. And I think this play shows his combination of his ball handling, shooting threat, and his decision making in the pick and roll. And let's talk about what Trae is capable of in just a simple pick and roll. Because Trae Young is one of the best pick and roll ball handlers, maybe even the best pick and roll ball handler in the NBA today. At the very least, from a passing perspective. You take one of the best passers in the NBA, you take a guy who has to be guarded at half court, has no issue shooting a deep three ball, has a floater, and then has some of the best lob threats in the NBA, the pick and roll becomes near unstoppable for the Atlanta Hawks when that offense is churning. Right here, Trae gets right past Tim Hardaway Jr. with a quick crossover, and the defender in drop coverage is left in no man's land, being stunned at by this incredible pass. Same quarter, Trae uses a crossover to set up his man for the screen, and the Pistons double Trae off the screen, but the small guard makes an impressive pass off the trap to Clint Capella. Doubling Trae Young in a pick and roll is kind of like blitzing Aaron Rodgers in his prime. It never ends up well for the defense. Again, a crossover combined with one of the better role players in the NBA. And Trae doesn't just run the pick and roll from the three-point line or from the elbow. We see him run incredibly high pick and rolls that start at the edges of the logo. And that leads to some unique looks, such as this pick and fade with Larry Nance Jr. right here. This action sees a pick and roll high enough to where Young is completely able to get around his man and still pull up from three over Victor Wembanyama. And one more time for good measure, his ball handling, pick and roll mastery combined with chemistry yields 2 points. And do I even need to talk about Trae Young's passing? He is averaging an otherworldly 11.5 assists per game. He is completely dominating the rest of the NBA when it comes to his assist totals. He is 4th in total drives per game and leads everyone by getting 2 assists per game just off of drives. Remember, he is 6'1". This isn't LeBron kicking it out. This isn't Luka Doncic having a ton of gravity. This is a 6'1" skinny guard driving to the hoop, getting 2 assists per game off of it. Obviously, Trae Young leads the entire NBA in points generated off of assists per game, and he's pretty high up there in just total points generated, behind guys like Nikola Jokic. But he has an incredibly wide lead on Nikola Jokic when it comes to potential assists per game, meaning shots that just didn't go in. For example, he has about an assist and a half, 2 assists lead on Nikola Jokic in assists per game. However, he has 5 more potential assists per game. If Trae Young's teammates shot 100%, he would average 21 assists per game. If Nikola Jokic's teammates shot 100%, he would average about 16 assists per game. Jokic is in 2nd place. Trae has always been an elite passer and a high volume scorer, but this year I think his Hawks teammates have been doing their absolute best when it comes to moving off of the ball and cutting for Trae Young to pass it to them. Because Trae Young is simply just great when it comes to passing out of the pick and roll, passing out of double teams, lobbing it up to, like I said, one of the best lob targets in the NBA, and in his passes in transition. Trae is simply just great at finding his teammates regardless of if the other team made a basket or not. So you always have to be on your toes when you're going up against Trae Young because he is always ready to kick it up court quickly and try to get back the 2 points that his team just gave up. It's no surprise that the Atlanta Hawks for a while now have been one of the fastest teams in the NBA, and currently they are second in pace this year. So you add all of these up, you have a player who is elite in the pick and roll, elite with the ball in his hands, and he is elite when it comes to passing in transition. Trae Young is one of the few players in the league that I would argue his passing gravity is equal to that of his scoring gravity. And the last thing to mention with Trae Young is it just feels like he has an incredibly deep bag of tricks and just always has a counter to what the defense throws at him. Like I said, he is incredible when it comes to reacting to double teams and finding an open man, whether it's a bounce pass, a lob pass, or an overhead kind of pass. He always seems to get the ball to the open guy, and he always seems to make it a perfect accuracy pass. He's added this LaMelo Ball one-legged three to his arsenal, and what's crazy is he's not even just shooting off of it. Like in this play right here, he pump fakes with the one-legged three and then gets an assist off of it. That's not even the first time that he's done that this year. Here against Washington, he uses a pump fake into a get action that ends up turning into a floater for him. He is a master of putting a defender on his hip or putting a defender in jail, which opens up space for his floater or mid-range shot. And I don't know if there is a single Hawks game that I have seen that we don't see Trae Young using a rondo fake against the defense and making a defender look stupid. And right here, we even see Trae Young gnashing the paint, meaning he goes under the hoop and kind of circles around a little bit because he knows that Victor Wembanyama is lurking and he times his shot perfectly to draw the foul. No player in the NBA is an engine of their offense with the ball in their hands in the same way as Trae Young. No player has mastered the pick and roll and the angles that comes with it in the same way as Trae Young. His craftiness, creativity, and his ability to just go into a deep bag of tricks is on a level that only a few players in NBA history have been able to replicate. Trae Young is simply just a walking highlight reel that turns the Atlanta Hawks into one of the elite offenses of the NBA. Trae Young has been proving his critics wrong all season, and last week was just a reminder of how good he can be at his peak. Now, he may never be that massive superstar, he may never be the #1 option on a contending team, but Trae Young is an all-star and a near all-NBA caliber player for a reason. Some say he's overrated, some say he's not efficient enough, but I say he is one of the most dynamic and crafty offensive engines that the NBA has seen in recent history. He may not be the all-time superstar that his draft day trade counterpart is, but Trae Young is not just a good passer. He's not just a high volume shooter, and he's not just a guy who can shoot really long three-pointers. He can be the driving force of an offense that elevates the game of his teammates and breaks even the most complicated of defensive schemes. His passing creates easy buckets, and when he is feeling it, he is impossible to guard. They call him Ice Trae for a reason. And yet, despite all of this, the conversation surrounding Trae Young never seems to end. He's either underhyped or he's overrated. But with multiple performances like what he did last week and now earning his 4th All-Star appearance, Trae Young isn't just answering his critics, he's silencing them. And if Trae can continue this elite level play after the All-Star break, and if the Hawks can make a late season push, we might just see Trae Young trade talks rapidly rise up.